My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 61 years old, and until that afternoon, I believed I was one of the luckiest women I knew. That morning, after 30 years with Callahan Systems, I received my retirement package, $3.2 million. I remember sitting in my boss's office, holding the envelope with both hands, like it might disappear if I didn't. He hugged me. My coworkers clapped. Someone joked that I'd finally escaped. I laughed, a little dazed, thinking about how every late night, every missed vacation, every weekend email had led to this moment. I left work 2 hours early. I didn't text my husband. I didn't call. I wanted to surprise him. I pictured his face when I told him we were finally secure, finally free to breathe. Maybe we'd open a bottle of wine. Maybe we'd talk about traveling. Italy had always been our dream. I pulled into our driveway just after 3. The house was quiet, the way it always was during the day. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, still smiling. That's when I heard his voice. It was coming from upstairs. From our bedroom. First, I didn't really listen. I was halfway through setting my purse down when a sentence cut through the air and stopped me cold. "Don't worry," he said, low and confident. "Once the divorce is final, I'll get at least half. Maybe more if she doesn't see it coming." I froze at the bottom of the staircase. The staircase where we'd taken Christmas photos every year. The staircase where he'd helped me hang balloons for our kids' birthdays. The staircase where we'd laughed, argued, carried boxes, carried memories. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He kept talking. "I know," he said. 30 years. She thinks this is the finish line. That's the best part. I didn't breathe. My fingers tightened around my car keys. My legs felt heavy, like they didn't belong to me anymore. Every instinct in my body screamed to run upstairs, to confront him, to demand an explanation. But I didn't. I stood there listening as my marriage collapsed in real time. He was calm, organized. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't emotional. This was a plan. And then he said something that changed everything. "We just have to time it right," he added. "Once the money's clear, it's clean. Half of it is mine. Half. 30 years of my work. 30 years of sacrifice. Reduced to a number he was already counting." I didn't go upstairs. I didn't slam a door. I didn't make a sound. I quietly turned around, stepped back outside, and closed the front door as gently as I could. I walked to my car like a stranger in my own life, and drove away without any destination in mind. I ended up in a coffee shop about 3 miles from our house. I sat there for nearly an hour, staring at the same spot on the table, replaying his words over and over. How long had he been planning this? How long had I been living beside someone who was waiting for the right moment to leave? And then, through the shock, one clear thought surfaced. He shouldn't know about the retirement package yet. The official announcement wouldn't go out until the next day. The money hadn't even been transferred, which meant only one thing. He hadn't reacted to the news. He'd prepared for it, and he'd revealed everything, before I told him a single thing. I stayed in that coffee shop until my hands stopped shaking. At first, my mind tried to protect me. It offered excuses, misunderstandings. Maybe I'd heard wrong. Maybe he was talking about something else. But the more I replayed his words, the clearer they became. Once the divorce is final, half of it is mine. Timing is everything. There was no confusion there. But one detail wouldn't let me go. He shouldn't have known about the retirement package. Not yet. At Callahan Systems, retirement payouts were treated like state secrets. Only a handful of people could see the numbers before the official release. I knew that because I'd helped design the compliance protocols years ago. So how did he know? That question was the first crack in his plan. I pulled out my phone and called Evan, a colleague from IT I'd trusted for years. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Evan," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." There was a pause. "Okay. Who can access retirement package details before they're announced?" "HR leadership," he said slowly. "A couple of executives. That's it." "Why?" I swallowed. "Can you check if anyone accessed my file recently?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Rachel, that's sensitive." "I know," I said. "But this matters. Please." 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Your file was accessed yesterday at 1:42 p.m., Evan said, by an HR manager. And there's something else. My stomach dropped. What? It was forwarded. Outside the company. I closed my eyes. To who? He read it slowly like he already knew I wouldn't like the answer. A financial consulting firm. Divorce-focused. The contact name is Mark Ellison. The word divorce felt like a punch to the chest. I thanked him, hung up, and immediately searched the firm online. Mark Ellison's face filled my screen. Early 40s. Perfect smile. Perfect suit. His website headline read, Strategic Divorce Planning for High-Value Marriages. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't panic. This wasn't fear. This wasn't a husband reacting to unexpected news. This was preparation. Scrolling through the site felt like reading my future written by someone else. Services included asset timing, retirement restructuring, and something called pre-divorce financial positioning. I didn't need a dictionary to know what that meant. He'd been planning to leave me before I ever left my job, and somehow someone inside my company had helped him. I drove home hours later after dark. The house looked the same. The lights were on. Dinner smells drifted through the air. He was in the kitchen, smiling like nothing in the world had changed. You're late, he said gently. Everything okay? I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I trusted with my life, my future, my money. Long day, I said. Just wrapping things up. He nodded, relieved. You deserve rest. 30 years is a long time. We ate dinner together. We talked about nothing. We watched television. We went to bed. And all night long I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, knowing something he believed I didn't. He thought he was ahead of me. The next morning I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I didn't tell anyone what I'd heard. Instead, I opened my laptop and searched for one thing. High-asset divorce attorney. If he was playing strategy, then so was I. Because this wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was coordinated. It was calculated. And it was already in motion. And now, so was I. That's when I understood something very clearly. This wasn't just a marriage ending. This was a financial ambush. And I was done being the only honest one in the room. For the next few days, I became exactly who he expected me to be. Normal. I laughed at his jokes. I asked what he wanted for dinner. I listened while he talked about work, about traffic, about nothing at all. I kissed him goodnight and said, I'm just tired, when he reached for me. And he believed every second of it. That was the hardest part. Because inside I was rewriting my entire life. I scheduled my first appointment with a divorce attorney 3 towns away, under my maiden name. I took a sick day from work and drove there alone, my hands clenched on the steering wheel the entire way. Her name was Janet Rowe. She was in her late 50s, sharp-eyed, calm, and dressed like someone who didn't waste words. When I finished telling her everything, the phone call, the HR breach, the financial advisor, she didn't look surprised. She leaned back in her chair and said, He's been planning this longer than you think. I nodded. What do I do? Janet folded her hands. First, you do nothing. At least on the surface. She explained it slowly, carefully, like she knew my heart was still racing. He doesn't know you overheard him. That's your greatest advantage. Second, the retirement money hasn't transferred yet. That matters. Third, if he's having an affair, and based on what you've told me, I'd bet he is, our state still considers adultery relevant in high-asset divorces. My pulse finally slowed. So I don't confront him? No, she said firmly. You observe. You document. You wait. She slid a yellow legal pad across the desk. Here are your rules, she said. Don't move money. Don't change passwords. Don't tip him off. Act exactly the way you always have. I stared at the list. Felt backwards. Unnatural. But it also felt powerful. That night at home, he poured us wine and asked what I wanted to do with my retirement. Maybe we'll finally travel, he said casually. You've earned it. I smiled. We'll see. It still doesn't feel real. He squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. The words almost broke me. Over the next week, I became a master of pretending. I helped him plan meals. I listened when he talked about downsizing someday. I even let him help me organize my home office, watching closely as he paid far too much attention to paperwork. Every detail went into my mental notebook. Meanwhile, Janet introduced me to a private investigator. His name was Caleb Morse. Former law enforcement. Quiet. Efficient. I don't need drama, I told him. I need truth. He nodded. That's usually the easiest kind of job. I gave him my husband's schedule, the advisor's name, and permission to dig as deep as necessary. At home, my husband became more attentive than he'd been in years. Compliments. Small gifts. Plans for the future. I realized then that he wasn't acting out of guilt. He was acting out of confidence. He thought the ending was already written. Late one night, I overheard him on the phone again. He'd gone into the garage, voice low. I'm being patient, he said. Yes, I know. Timing matters. She trusts me. That word trust echoed in my chest. The next morning Janet called. Remember, she said, this only works if you stay quiet. I can do that, I replied. And for the first time since I'd heard his voice on the staircase, I meant it. Because silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. For nearly 3 decades, I'd been honest to a fault. Transparent. Loyal. Predictable. Now, for the first time in my life, I was none of those things. I was prepared. And I was no longer the person he thought he was dealing with. Caleb worked fast. Too fast for someone who didn't already know what he was looking for. 3 days after I hired him, he called and said, I think you should come by. Not I found something. Not we need to talk. Just that. His office was small and forgettable, tucked between a dental clinic and a dry cleaner. He handed me a manila folder the moment I sat down. Before you open it, he said, I want you to understand something. None of this is accidental. I opened the folder. Photographs. My husband sitting across from a woman I didn't recognize at a cafe 2 towns over. Close enough that their knees almost touched. Another photo. His hand on her lower back as they walked toward a hotel entrance. Time-stamped. Dated. 7 months ago. My breath stayed steady. I'd already mourned him. There's more, Caleb said. He slid another stack across the desk. Screenshots. Phone records. Calendars that suddenly made sense. This woman, he continued, is the financial advisor you mentioned. Divorce-focused. Aggressive. Expensive. I recognized her face immediately from the website I'd seen. She specializes in what she calls pre-divorce positioning, Caleb said, which is a clean way of saying she helps clients move chess pieces before the other side realizes the game has started. I flipped another page. Notes. Typed summaries. She's coached him, Caleb said quietly. Not just financially. Strategically. I looked up. Coached him how? To document behaviors. To frame you as financially controlling. To exaggerate moments. To build a narrative. My hands tightened around the folder. He's been advised to say you handled all the money. That you kept him in the dark. That he felt dependent. None of it was true. He'd never cared about finances. He'd never asked. He's also been advised to file after the retirement payout, Caleb continued. That's when the leverage would be highest. I leaned back in the chair. He thinks he's being patient, I said. Caleb nodded. He thinks he's being smart. I drove home in silence. That evening my husband asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I said yes. I curled up beside him on the couch while he wrapped an arm around my shoulders. His phone buzzed twice. He didn't look at it. Another note for the file. Over the next week, Caleb built a timeline so clean it was almost clinical. Meetings. Messages. Locations. Advice given. Moves planned. And the deeper he dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't panic. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a long game. Meanwhile, I became calmer than I'd ever been. There was comfort in facts. In proof. In knowing I wasn't crazy or paranoid or overreacting. I was late to a conversation that had already started, but I'd caught up quickly. One night, my husband said, "You've been quiet lately." I smiled. Just tired. He kissed my forehead. "You've worked so hard. Everything's about to get easier." I nodded. He had no idea how true that was. Janet reviewed the evidence 2 days later. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply said, "This changes everything." "How so?" I asked. You're no longer reacting, she replied. You're controlling the timing. And timing is power. She laid it out plainly. The affair mattered. The advisor mattered. The illegal data access mattered. But most of all, the order of events mattered. He thinks he's writing your ending, Janet said. But he's handed you the draft. I went home that night and slept better than I had in months, because for the first time since the staircase I wasn't bracing for impact anymore. I was watching the trap close. He still believed he was in charge. Still believed I was unaware. Still believed he was one step ahead. And every day he stayed confident he gave me another advantage. He thought he was writing my ending. I was collecting his evidence. The day the retirement funds hit my account, I stayed calm. Breakfast was quiet. My husband made eggs and toast, humming like everything was ordinary. It was ordinary for him, not for me. At 9:15 a.m., my phone lit up with the notification. $3.2 million transferred. Not a cent had been touched yet. Not a single move had been made without protection. I worked with Janet to have every dollar locked into a legal trust, ironclad under Virginia law. The moment the funds cleared, they were untouchable. By 11 a.m., the trust was established. Legal language, signatures, notarized documents. Every contingency accounted for. Every loophole covered. And all the while, my husband went about his morning oblivious to the earthquake beneath his feet. At 2 p.m., a knock at the door. Not me. Not Janet. But a neutral party. Divorce papers served. Blindsided. He opened the door himself. The server handed him the documents, left and walked away. I wasn't there. I watched later through a security camera Janet recommended I install. The look on his face was priceless. Shock, confusion, disbelief. His hands shook slightly as he realized he had no idea what was coming next. Then the phone rang. His lawyer, clearly flustered. I could hear snippets of their conversation from the recording Janet shared. Your client. You have proof of adultery? Evidence of fraud? And illegal access to retirement documents? The lawyer stammered. Yes, Janet replied calmly. We have photographic proof of the affair, hotel visits, documented meetings, phone records, everything. Your client has already conspired with a financial advisor to manipulate the upcoming settlement. And a Morrison HR employee illegally forwarded sensitive information. We are prepared to pursue criminal charges if necessary. Silence. The lawyer's voice faltered. He tried to negotiate. Janet smiled. Calm, precise. Every word measured. She outlined the settlement. 40% of marital assets, excluding the retirement package. That meant he would walk away with nothing from my $3.2 million. Zero. Nada. The house, joint savings, cars, negotiable. Retirement package, untouchable. I stayed seated at my kitchen table pretending to sip my coffee, while the real game unfolded just a few blocks away. The next few hours were quiet. He made calls. His financial advisor panicked once they realized their actions were traceable. The HR employee was put on leave, soon to be terminated for violating privacy laws. Every piece of the plan I'd suspected was now unraveling, but it felt surreal watching it all collapse in slow motion. By evening, Janet had finalized everything. The trust protected the retirement package. The settlement was accepted. Legal authority, evidence, and strategy had tipped the scales entirely in my favor. When I finally spoke to my husband later that night, he was silent, defeated. He tried to muster composure, but the exhaustion in his voice betrayed him. He had underestimated patience, underestimated preparation, underestimated the quiet power of waiting, documenting, and playing the long game. He'd spent months orchestrating a takeover, thinking he was clever. Every meeting, every call, every attempt to manipulate the narrative. It had all been countered. Every step he took had given me an advantage I didn't even have to chase aggressively. I realized then that the best victories aren't flashy. They aren't loud confrontations or screaming matches. They're quiet, calculated, unseen until the moment the outcome is undeniable. And in that moment he realized it. That meeting he expected to win, that day he thought he'd take control, became the exact moment he understood he'd lost. Completely. I poured a glass of wine and watched the sunset. A sense of relief, calm, and quiet triumph settled over me. My funds were secure, my strategy had worked, And the person I used to know as my husband had no idea how much he'd underestimated me. The trap wasn't messy. It wasn't humiliating. It was clean, precise, and absolute. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about shouting. It's about timing, evidence, and patience. Sometimes it's about letting them move first, thinking they're ahead, while quietly writing the rules they never knew existed. The days after the settlement were almost surreal. Life felt normal on the surface, but beneath it, everything had shifted. My husband had moved out, leaving behind the empty echoes of a house that had once been ours. The apartment he'd chosen felt temporary, unmoored, a reflection of his sudden loss of control. I stayed in the house, but it didn't feel the same. Not because of what he'd taken or tried to take, but because I knew the truth. I knew how close I'd come to losing everything I'd built over 30 years, and I knew that one overheard conversation had changed my entire future. David Thompson disappeared almost immediately after the papers were served. Once he realized his potential criminal liability was exposed, he vanished from the picture. It was strange, almost anticlimactic, like a shadow retreating before the light. Meanwhile, Margaret Chun, the HR employee who had illegally shared my private retirement documents, faced immediate termination. Morrison Engineering acted swiftly once the breach was confirmed, and a federal investigation was launched into the unauthorized release of confidential information. The system had corrected itself, quietly but decisively. I downsized my life, moving into a smaller home nestled in the Virginia mountains. 3 bedrooms, a workshop, and a view of the valley. It wasn't lavish, but it was mine. It was peaceful. I could finally hear myself think, breathe, and rebuild a life on my terms. I spent my days woodworking, hiking, volunteering at the local veteran center. The mountains became my sanctuary, a place where the betrayal and chaos felt far away. Reconnecting with my children was one of the greatest rewards. They were in their 20s, seeing the world with fresh eyes, and yet they had lived through the tension of the past months in their own way. I explained everything, how the retirement package had been almost lost, how patience and strategy had saved me. They were hurt, of course, but they understood. They saw the betrayal too, and they respected the way I had handled it. Quietly, strategically, with integrity. Every now and then, I reflect on the marriage I'd lost. I think of my husband, of the life we had built together, of what could have been. Some nights a pang of grief hits. But mostly I feel gratitude for clarity, for timing, for the moment I overheard the conversation that changed everything. The lesson became crystal clear. When faced with betrayal, the first instinct is often to react, to confront, to shout, to demand answers. But reaction is vulnerable. Reaction is visible. Reaction gives the other person time to adapt, to hide, to manipulate. Strategy, patience, and evidence. These are the real tools of protection. These are what turn the tables when others are counting on emotion to control the outcome. I didn't just protect my retirement package. I protected my dignity, my independence, and my peace of mind. The divorce itself, handled according to Virginia law, was straightforward once the evidence was in place. The settlement left my former spouse with a fair share of marital assets, excluding the retirement package that was rightfully mine. No theatrics, no public humiliation, no unnecessary confrontation. Just justice. Quiet, certain, complete. Sometimes I sit on the porch, watching the sunset over the mountains. I think of the oak staircase in our old house, the Christmas photos, the dreams we had. And I think of the $3.2 million now safely secured in my trust. But more than the money, I think about freedom, the ability to live without fear, without manipulation, without betrayal controlling my future. The best revenge I've learned is not anger. It is not dramatic confrontation or public shaming. It is preparation. It is evidence. It is patience. It is securing what is yours while letting the world reveal the truth quietly. And in the end, I won more than money. I won my freedom, my peace, and the satisfaction of knowing that the person who tried to take everything from me had been outmaneuvered. Not with force, but with foresight, discipline, and quiet resolve. Sometimes silence speaks louder than rage. And sometimes the victory that truly matters is the one you achieve while the world thinks you are still powerless.